Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful again that we can open your word together. We're thankful for the promise of your Holy Spirit to teach us and to lead us. And we invite your presence into our lives, into our hearts, into our minds. We know, Lord, that there's many things in your word that we do not understand. And we ask, Lord, that the things that are important, that you will give us a clear understanding of, and the things that are not needful now, that you'll not allow us to speculate in any way that contradicts your word. Help us to trust in you, in the way that you lead in our lives, as we see how you lead in this world and how you are in control. So we give our hearts to you again, and we ask for your presence and your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to end up erasing this that's behind me, but I left it here. Just some final thoughts dealing with what we see in Ezekiel chapter 1 is that we obviously don't understand it fully. I spent a bit of time looking at how we could understand this, and I don't know. I don't have the answers to it completely. What I do know is that here in Ezekiel chapter 1, we have symbols that would be understood as the zodiac. And we know that in the diagram behind me, that this is the layout of the children of Israel. And I sort of superimposed some of the information from Ezekiel 1 on top of this, and then from Jewish tradition regarding the banners. And so if I'm not going to go over it, but anybody who's watching the series needs to watch the two previous ones dealing with this. And I tried to figure out if he's on the 5th day of the 4th month. So if Ezekiel is on the 5th day of the 4th month in 592 BC, and this is describing what he would see as the day begins at sunset, what you would have had is that the sun would have been in the constellation of Leo. So at that time, and the date would have been, I think it's July 15th or July 14th at sunset, that the 5th day of the 4th month began. Now it's July 21st in the Julian calendar, but on the Gregorian calendar. So if we put it into our calendar today, he would have been there on July 15th or July 14th. July 15th would have been July 21st. So at that time, there was 6 days difference, the opposite way from how we have them now. That is, the Gregorian would be behind the Julian calendar in 592 BC. And we take it that the constellation of Leo has the sun, that is, it sets with the sun from July 21st to August 22nd. Of course, that's not the case now. Actually, the constellation of Leo, if you went by how it sets now, it's about a whole month later. So I think it's around, anyway, it's somewhere in August where the constellation of Leo sets with the sun now. But in the past, it changed. And that's because of the precession of the equinoxes. And that's because the Earth's tilt continues to move and the North Star changes over time. Now, it is interesting. So this is a detail that may not make much sense to everyone. But if you've watched my studies on chronology, we know that the Jews divide the day. So a day, we have it as our day equals 1,440 minutes. That's how many minutes are in a day. But to the Jews, they don't have minutes and seconds. They have a division, which they call a helek. And a helek is about 3 1/3 seconds. Well, it is 3 1/3 seconds. And in a day, they have 25,920 halakim. And so these are their divisions of a day. So it's different than ours. Now, when, and they have in an hour, they have this many halakim in an hour. So you just take this and multiply it by 24, and you would get this number. So we ran into that when we did Acts 27. Now, the Jews have a thing called a molad. Now, a molad is a way in which they calculate the length of the month, the average length of the month, and they have it in a way that's more refined than this, but one of the ways they do it is this molad. It's called the molad epic, and it's a period of 25,920 months. So it's interesting that the way that they look at this period of time is similar to the number of divisions of a day. And this 25,920 months occurs in 765,432 days plus 1. So that's the way they like to do it. They could go 765,433 days, because that's how many days it is. But they do it this many days plus 1. So you get this number 765,432.1. That's how many days there are in this many months. Now, the ancients, the Babylonians, they had calculated, so I'm just going to do this a bit different here. So a moled epic is 25,920 months. Now, the precession of the equinoxes. So if you were to, like right now, we're actually in Leo. And if we were to go around to get back to where the same precession of the equinox lines up with our year, the ancients had calculated this to be 25,920 years. So this is the whole precession. It's called the Great Year. And I found that this is a very, very interesting number. Now, what it is simply is it's 360 times 72. So it's based on this cycle of, or not, this 360 degrees of a circle. And so that's how they did this calculation. That's why they came up with this number. Now, if you go online and you try to find out how long the precession of the equinoxes are, they will say sometimes it's 26,000 years. And other times they will give a more precise estimate, a 25,770. So that might be one you would see. And then you'll also see smaller ones, 25,680, I think is the smallest one I saw. And the thing about this, why this is smaller, is it has to do with how long we think the year is. Now, for the ancients, they based theirs upon the actual length of the tropical year. So even though we have this calculation here, they knew how long the year was. They know it's not 360 days. That has to do with degrees of the circle and times 72 years, because 72 years is the period of time that it takes to move, for the precession of the equinox to move 1 degree. So, so every 72 years, when you see the constellation setting with the sun, it takes 72 years for that to move 1 degree. And so so to get 360 degrees is times 72 years, and that's how they get that number. So that has to do with degrees, but they understood how long the year was. And So based upon how long the year was in the past, this actually fits to the length of the year that existed in the ancient times, in the times of the Babylon. But now our year is getting longer slightly. And as the year gets longer, it changes this number. So this is just a rounded off number. This is just kind of 26,000 years. You know, these numbers are close enough to that. But if you go look at the precession of the equinoxes over millions of years, then it keeps getting this number smaller. So this is over 20 precessions of the equinox, so 20 great years. You would average it out to this. But the longer time you go into the future, the smaller this number becomes. I know that maybe not everybody's going to understand that. But there are some significant things anyway within nature that shows that there's design. And, you know, of course, we know that the Jews, in choosing the length of how to divide the day, was based upon their understanding of the universe, right? So their understanding of the sky. And this Moled epoch, which they used to calculate how long the month was. Again, it was something in nature. And then this precession of the equinox, again, it's something in nature. So God has this number that shows up again and again, and I'm not sure of the significance of it. Another way you could look at it is it's 2520 plus 720, right? So it's because 2520 is 360 times 7. So this is 2520 times 10, I guess, times with 270 added. So there's a way of looking at this, that it's connected to the 2520, it's connected to the 2300 days, it's connected to Bible prophecy, but I'm not sure what it means. All I know is that I've noticed it as a number. So in Ezekiel, so today we're going to try to cover Ezekiel chapter 2 and 3, because parts of these chapters are really in Ezekiel chapter 2, you probably could have just had it continued. Ezekiel chapter 3 is just kind of a continuation of Ezekiel chapter 2. And then there's another section in Ezekiel chapter 3 that could have been made a separate chapter, but this is how the chapters are divided. Now, I'm going to erase all this. Now, we're going to look at this, and we did read chapter 2 a little bit yesterday, that it's going to introduce this scroll. We're going to spend some time studying the scroll, and then tomorrow we're going to study a little bit more about what Ezekiel's visions themselves and the significance of them. So I'll share this on the screen. And he said unto me, Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee. And the Spirit entered into me when he spake unto me, and set me upon my feet, that I heard him that spake unto me. And he said unto me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that hath rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me, even unto this very day. For they are impudent children and stiff-hearted. I do send thee unto them, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God. And they, whether they hear or whether they forbear, for they are a rebellious house, yet shall know that there hath been a prophet among them. So we know about Ezekiel's call. He's called to give this message. And when it says here the children of Israel, this is not talking about northern Israel, because northern Israel doesn't exist as such at this time, because it's gone into captivity, it's been scattered. And so Ezekiel is going to use these terms Israel, and he's going to use the term Judah, for the most part interchangeably. unless he's specifically referring to northern Israel, when he speaks of Israel, he's just speaking to the children of Israel, which Judah is the children of Israel, just as much as northern Israel was. And whether they hear or whether they forbear. Now, the word forbear would have to do with whether they're going to heed it and take it into account and act out the appropriate actions, whatever that warning is. So this message has to be given whether they hear it or not, whether they listen or not. Now, he's going to say some words of encouragement, I guess they would be, because he's going to tell them basically, he's going to tell Ezekiel that God is going to protect him. God says he's going to protect him and help him. He says, "But thou, son of man, be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns be with thee. And thou dost dwell among scorpions, be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house." So he encourages them, they're going to have words against you. And the looks, I guess this would be not just that they're looking at you in anger, but also just how things appear. So in this situation, from my perspective of looking at this would put it into our time that we have to give a message, and whether people listen or not, no matter what the words are that are said about what we have said, and no matter how it appears, we have to know that God has given us this message to give. "And thou shalt speak my words unto them, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. But thou, son of man, hear what I say unto thee. Be not thou rebellious like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth and eat that I give thee." So God is going to give us a message. And we've taught this for a long time, that we have this message to give to God's people, and that we have to eat this message. Thy words were found and I did eat them. Thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of mine heart. So we know that when we eat God's words, there's going to be joy. There's going to be sweet in our mouth. That's one of the things we know about God's word. The other passage here that we often reference is, well, I'll get there. Just hang on, I'll finish this here. "And he spread it before me." So this is a book. Okay, I have to read verse 9. "And then when I looked, behold, a hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein." So you have this hand with a book in it. "And he spread it before me, and it was written within and without, and there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe." So he's got this message to give, and this message is not a good, pleasant message of what it's talking about, because it's a message of warning: lamentations, mourning, and woe. So the verse that we often first look at, so let's go to Revelation chapter 4. And I did a bit of a study on this on Friday, and so in a little bit more detail as far as Revelation 4 is concerned, but I'm going to look at this as well. So we know that Revelation 4, already we've compared it to Ezekiel chapter 1. So we know that Revelation 4 has this, and it's actually chapter 5, but 4 and 5. So we're going to have the same vision that we see in Ezekiel. And then when we go to chapter 5, we're going to see basically the same story. So in Ezekiel, we had this vision of God's throne and these cherubim. And then when we go to Revelation chapter 4, we see the same thing, a vision of God's throne. We have the seraphim, and they have similarities, but differences regarding them. So one has 4 wings, the other has 6 wings, but they have the same faces involved and the same symbols, which would be signs of the zodiac. So of the constellations that we see in the sky. And in Revelation 5:1, we get this basically the same scene that we just read in Ezekiel chapter 2 at the end, verse 9 and 10. And I saw on the right hand of him that sat upon the throne a book written within, and on the backside sealed with 7 seals. So this one is, again, we have similarities, but some differences. This book here is sealed, and it's sealed with 7 seals. So it doesn't say anything in Ezekiel about the book being sealed, but here in Revelation it does. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof. And it says, no man in heaven nor in earth, neither under the earth, was able to open the book, neither to look thereon. And I wept much, because no man was found worthy to open and read the book, neither to look thereon. And one of the elders saith unto me, weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. So we have this one in the right hand of him that sat on the throne. We have this book. It's in his open hand, Ellen White's going to say. But nobody can open that book. But then we see somebody that can. So in 5 verse 5, and we see that this is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So in looking at this, in just going back to Ezekiel, and this is maybe a bit of speculation, but when I look at Ezekiel on the 5th day of the 4th month in 592 BC, he's in the constellation of Leo, the lion, right? So if you go back to that date and you look, and I'm going to show you here, I did give you the link to this stellarium. This is a astronomy program, and in this program I can go to different periods of time. I'm just going to quickly flip through this here. So in order to go back in time, the only way I found to do this is to click reverse, and I have to get going pretty fast, to go back quickly, and then I have to hit play to stop it. So I'm just going to go back to 592 BC. So yeah, it's kind of flashing there really quickly. I'm already at 300 and 400. So you might be able to see this. You might not be able to see it. I'm just going to slow it down. That's a little too slow. Yeah, a little faster. So I'm at 525. So I wish there was just that you could just type in the time that you want or the date you want. But oops. I didn't mean to. So yeah, this is a bit tedious to use sometimes. Now I'm a little bit past. So I actually have to go on this program to 591. I need to speed that up a bit. That's 6 months, 7 months. It looks like I'm going really fast, but I'm going much slower than I was. And okay. So this is July 24th, so I just got to go back a couple days. So there we are. So here's the sky as it was on the 5th day of the 4th month. And I'm just going to have it go back. So I'm going backwards in time. So and I want to look in the west. So here's the west. And so you can see that these are going backwards. And so I'm going to get to sunset. So there's the sunset on the 21st. Oh, that's not the sunset. This is. I need to change. There it is. That's sunset. And you can see here's Virgo. If you can see that, I'm going to zoom in. So here's Virgo just above that. And this is Leo. So this is the lion. And so in 592, at sunset, commencing July 21st, Julian calendar. You can see that the sun's in the constellation of Leo. Now, I'm just going to go and look in the east. And when you look in the east, over here, and if you have the sun set, Aquarius is going to rise. So I think it's over here. So Leo and Aquarius are opposite each other. So as Leo sets, Aquarius rises. Now, so this is just, going through these constellations. You can look at different times. You can look at different dates. You can see the sky. If I go like, whoops. If I go like this, I can see the whole sky. I can zoom out. You can see everything that's happening in the sky, all the different constellations. I can get rid of the names of them. Lots of different things that I can do. And so when we look at this that he's in the constellation of Leo, and we go to Revelation, let me just get out of this here. Did I close that? No, here it is. So I go to Revelation chapter 5, and we have the line of the tribe of Judah. And so the fact that we have here this reference to this lion, this to me, it ties us back to Ezekiel as well. So there's something about Ezekiel proclaiming his message at the time of the year that he does, that it lines up with the constellation of Leo, which is the lion. Leo is a lion. And so we have here, in this similar scene in Revelation 5, this reference to this line of the tribe of Judah. And of course, that goes to that layout that we had of the tribes around the sanctuary. Now, he's the root of David, and he hath prevailed to open the book and loose the 7 seals thereof. Now, we're going to see this scene of this throne. And so it's very similar to what we had in Ezekiel. We first had the description of all these beasts, and then we're going to have this description of the throne. I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne, and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. So we see one seated upon the throne. And on that same throne, in the middle of that throne, we see these 4 beasts, right? So in the midst of this throne, in the center there, and the midst of the elders. So in the midst of the throne, in the midst of the elders, in the center of this scene, is this lamb that had been slain. And he's going to open the book, because it says he came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne. And when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors. So this is incense, which are the prayers of the saints. So this is referring to the altar of incense as far as these vials are concerned. So these are the censers that the high priest uses and the priests use with this incense from the altar of incense, and they symbolize the prayers of the saints. But we also have this lamb. Now we know Jesus is not literally a lamb, and he doesn't literally have 7 horns and 7 eyes. So in trying to understand this, we've often looked at, when we see these visions, we often think of them in a literal sense. It's our natural reaction. And so many people will say, well, the one seated upon the throne must be the Father. And because Jesus is the Lamb, and he's going to take this scroll from the hand of the Father. And so they have to be separate. In the context here, though, we know that this is symbolic. That Jesus isn't a lamb. He doesn't look like that. And so in trying to understand this as a symbol, the way that I've understood it, and this goes back 30 plus years of studying this chapter and looking at the spirit of prophecy. And she will talk about, and I should have had all these verses ready, but I don't. But if you do a search dealing with the rainbow and the throne, so let's just do that. So I'm going to have a quote set up here regarding this document. But if I go rainbow and throne, oops, I have to spell rainbow correctly. And I'm probably going to need to add, okay, I put the word head there because I know she says he points to, so the in heaven, the semblance of the rainbow encircles the throne and overarches the head of Christ. And so she talks about this rainbow above the throne and above the head of Christ. It's there's a symbol of grace encircling his head. So some of these are going to be the same quotes. And so this is the one. It's in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 107. In heaven, the semblance of a rainbow encircles and overarches the head of Christ. The prophet says, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about the throne. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Jehovah. The Revelator declares, behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne, and there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. When man by his great wickedness invites the divine judgments, the Savior, interceding with the Father in his behalf, points to the bow in the clouds and to the rainbow around the throne and above his own head, as a token of the mercy of God toward the repentant sinner. So this is my point regarding that. Is that we think that it's the Father on the throne. We just naturally assume that. But when we look at what Ellen White says, it seems clear to me that the one seated upon the throne with the rainbow is Christ. And that Christ seated upon the throne can't open this book. So something has to happen. There has to be an occurrence in order for this mystery, this book, to be unsealed. Christ has to step down from his throne in heaven, and he has to become a man, and he has to die upon the cross. That is the gospel. That's the gospel promise that goes right back to Genesis chapter 3. And so this is my view on this. I know some people might have different views regarding that, but to me it seems very clear. And I've read many books by Adventist scholars on commentaries on Revelation, and they all say it's the Father on the throne. I don't think I've ever found anyone who says it's the Son that's on the throne, that Christ is on the throne. They all put the Father on the throne, but Ellen White appears not to. So maybe there's something that I'm reading wrong. I don't know, but that's in my study back when I was in my early 20s, so 35 years ago. That's when I first studied this out. And came to that conclusion. And I haven't found anything that in the spirit of prophecy that would lead me to think something different. So I should go back to this passage here. So we see that this one that's going to take the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne is this lamb, as it had been slain. So Christ is the key that unlocks prophecy. Now, one of the things that we saw when we looked at Ezekiel, and we saw what he saw in vision, and we can see this in Revelation, that there's a connection between what he sees in vision and the message that he has to give. So I'm going to try to illustrate this. I haven't really thought about how to illustrate this. But, here we have this vision. And this vision is very cryptic, right? So both in Ezekiel and Revelation, there's this vision, and this vision is of this throne. And this throne shows us that God is in charge of the things that happen. And even though we see these symbols of this zodiac, so this is going to be a vision of the zodiac. So it's not dealing with astrology. It's just the fact that we're seeing the representations of the sky in symbols with these beasts. And so you're going to have this vision of the zodiac, and then you're going to have this throne, and maybe I'll do it this way, just an arrow. Then you have this throne, And this throne shows that God is in control. Right? So the zodiac, the stars aren't in control. God is in control. But then this is going to lead to this book, right? So it could be a scroll or a book, however you want to, what word you want to use, but there's this book. And this book is going to be written on within and without. So within and on the backside. So in Ezekiel it says within and without. In Revelation it says within and on the backside. So the way that I understand that it means the same thing. So it has stuff that's written on the inside and written on the outside, the backside. And then this book is going to have to be eaten, and then it's going to be a message. Right? So you're starting with this vision of the sky, these angels, these representations of the zodiac. You have this throne that comes in, and this throne then shows that God's in control, that the sky is not in control. And then you have this book that's introduced. And in Ezekiel, it's not sealed, but in Revelation, it's sealed. And then you're going to have to eat this book, right? So there's going to be the eating of the book, which is going to deal with giving this message. Right? So they're going to have a message to give. And the question is, what is this book, and how is it related to this? So that's kind of what I want to look at next. Now, I did study this on Friday, as I said, and the quote we have from Spirit of Prophecy, bring it up here. It's in Manuscript Releases, Volume 20, and page 197, or 196. It starts on. We asked John, oh, I need to bring it up here so you can see it. We asked John what he saw and heard in the vision at Patmos, and he answers, "And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, 'Who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof?' And no man in heaven, nor in earth, neither under the earth, was able to open the book, neither to look thereon." And then she says, "There in his open hand lay the book." The role of the history of God's providences. So when we think about the history of God's providences, I mean, we can think often in our own life that these are circumstances that arise that God, in his wisdom, puts before us. They often aren't the things that we want. Providences can sometimes be quite discouraging events in our personal life. And, often we look at the situations that happen in this world and they appear to be chance. Whether this happens or that happens. Hitler could have died as a little child. How different would the world be if he had died, got sick and died from some disease, or Trump, if he had never lived? How different would the world be? And of course, we can't answer that because there's so many people that have died. If they had lived, how different would the world be? So these are God's providences. God has provided circumstances that appear to be chance on the surface. And this is what the book of Ecclesiastes deals with. There's 2 different perspectives, under heaven and under the sun. And under heaven, things are guided by God. Under the sun, things appear to be just chance. It's just what we see and perceive from a human perspective. Under heaven is from God's view of things. So we have the prophetic history of nations and the church. So history of all the nations that happen, we know that that's written in this book. And so we need to understand what this book is, but also the church. Herein was contained the divine utterances, his authority, his commandments, his laws, the whole symbolic counsel of the eternal, and the history of all ruling powers in the nations. In symbolic language was contained in that role the influence of every nation tongue, and people from the beginning of Earth's history to its close. So when we ask people, what is this book? What kind of answers would you give? What is this book? What kind of answers would you give, or what kind of answers would people give?
Word of God.
Okay, we would say it's the Word of God. It's the Bible. But I think, and I'm not saying it's not the Bible, because the Bible contains all of these things. But there's something that is sort of beyond the Bible. Now, it says in symbolic language. So what is symbolic language?
There's something in the background that not everybody's going to see.
Okay. Well, it's the language of symbols, right? So symbolic language is not language that's written as words. Now, we could say, we write things in a symbolic language, in that I'm writing it in some way that I'm using symbols. But that's not what she's actually saying. It's a symbolic language. It's a language of symbols. And so obviously, we could include the Bible in this, but I think there's something more when we look at Ezekiel and we look at what he sees. He is seeing the history of the world, but he's seeing it in this representation of time. That is, time is contained in what God has made and what he has created. So when God has created the world, let's look there, even though we're very familiar with the scripture. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. And, we know in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. We don't know exactly when that is, because this Genesis 1 verse 1, if we read the spirit of prophecy, it's very clear that there was a creation that occurred with angels, with Lucifer, that existed before the earth was created. Because the reason the earth was created was God to give a witness for Lucifer of God's love. He was trying to win Lucifer in his rebellion, and he created this earth. And then we know that there's going to be war in heaven. And when war in heaven happens, Satan's going to be cast down to this earth. And some of these things are not clear to me. That is, when I've read them in the spirit of prophecy and I've tried to understand them in the Bible, the question is, when was Satan cast down to the earth? We know he was on the earth when Adam and Eve sinned. So we don't know exactly when that war in heaven occurred and when Satan was cast down to the earth. I'm not sure when that would have happened. So there's some things that are mysteries to me. If you read The Story of Redemption by Ellen White, she gives this picture of what things were like before the creation of the earth, as far as this rebellion that happened in heaven. So as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, often we just say, well, the earth is 6,000 years old, which it is, from the time of the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. We're going back 6,000 years, roughly. But we know the earth was without form and void. So there was this earth, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Whatever that means, some people say that this is some kind of primordial sort of situation, but we're all just speculating. We don't really understand what things were before the earth was created. We don't know, and then it says, God says, let there be light, and there was light. Well, is this when light was created? Was there not light when there was Lucifer in heaven and the angels were singing? So obviously light existed. So in some way, something happened to this earth and light came into being, and it reached this earth. I don't like to speculate. I've always been interested in science, and I know that when I was a child, I used to read all these old commentaries that my grandfather had collected, and they would speculate upon these types of things. And one of the first things they did as Christianity moved away from God's word was they would attack the Genesis story. They would attack the creation story. They would try to give long ages for the earth. And what I saw was this gradual undermining of God's word that happened over time within Christianity, to the point that when my dad was in seminary, and when he was a minister, they didn't really believe that even, any of these stories. They were all kinds of just myths that were passed down. So there's obviously a danger in trying to go beyond God's word and trying to figure out things scientifically. And so I try not to do that. I just try to stay with God's word. And so all I do know is that the earth was created 6,000 years ago based upon God's word, but I can't explain things before that. But anyway, that's sort of a little bit of an aside. We're going to have this light, this day and night that occurs. And obviously this day and light occurs without the sun and without the moon, because we know that it's not until day 4 that we're going to get the creation of the sun and the moon. So it says in verse 14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And so we know that these lights were given to be for signs. Now, sign is a symbol. That's what the Hebrew word is. It just means a symbol. So they're given for symbols, and they mark out the seasons and the days and the years. And we know that God put them in the heavens for us. Now, I've dealt with in one of my papers on understanding the calendars, I addressed the idea that people have, which I had and held for many years, that originally the year was 360 days long and the months were 30 days long. And I tried to reverse engineer from what we have now to try to imagine what would have to occur to the earth, to the moon and the earth orbits to affect the change to what we have presently. So you can take what we have presently, how long our synodic month is and how long our year is, and you could say, what would I have to do to go back? And what I found is that you really can't have a 360-day year and a 30-day month in any sort of way that preserves what we have. That is, a moon and the earth have to be a certain distance from the sun and from each other, and the moon has to be a certain size in order for solar eclipses to occur. And we also have to have the same side of the moon always facing the earth. And at any type of change of one part of the system, it changes the whole part of the system. And so you can't actually reverse engineer from what we have to go back. If we had a 360-day year and a 30-day month and it changed, I can't figure out a way that it would change into what we have now. Now, of course, God could just do that, but people are always looking for this natural cause, so that at the flood, you could have this firmament collapsed by at a strike by an asteroid. There's all different kinds of theories that people have. But in every single one of them, the type of catastrophe that occurs could not produce the present system if we had a 360-day year and 30-day month. We had this sort of called perfect system. So my point is here that God created these things as a timepiece. And it doesn't make sense to me that God would change this timepiece, because it's supposed to declare from the beginning of Earth's history to the end. It's going to tell a story. The sky is going to be a witness of history. And when it says that this book is written within and without in symbolic language, the way that I look at it, or the way that I'm proposing that we could look at it, is that what Ezekiel sees and what John sees is time represented by the sky. that God is in control of, and that God has foreseen all of the events. Now, I don't think that means we can look at the constellations and try to figure out, prophecy from that. I think that's a mistake, and I've seen people try to do that. One is it's too highly speculative. It's too open to misinterpretation. And I think we can just use it in the Bible in a sort of a more a poetic sense. Maybe not strong enough, or maybe it's too weak. I'm not sure. But what I would say is that God is in control of time, and he has used these symbols of the sky as a testimony. And so that there is something about the sky, something about the months and the days and the years that we can use prophetically in time prophecy. So we know that Daniel has clear time prophecies, Ezekiel has clear time prophecies, and John has clear time prophecies. And these time prophecies are based upon the natural movements of the sun and the moon and the stars in the heavens. That is, these mark out the time. And when we think about time prophecies and we think about calendars, and this was a presentation I did back in November of 2018 when I presented Ezekiel and the wheels within wheels as timepieces. That this is God's symbolic representation of time. And that in understanding time, God is in control of time. But God gives us a message that relates to time. So this is kind of a roundabout way, so in looking at it. But when we go back to this Ellen White quote, and I'll bring this up on the screen again. Within this role was written within and without, John says, right? So we know that. And it says, I wept much because no man was found worthy. And the one that's going to open this up is the Lion of the tribe of David, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David. He has prevailed. So this is dealing with Christ coming and dying. And we know that that's a time prophecy. So when it says in the paragraph above, there in his open hand lay the book, the roll of the history of God's providences, the prophetic history of nations and the church. Herein was contained the divine utterances. We know day unto day utters speech, night unto night showeth knowledge. We know that God speaks and he creates the heavens. So everything that God has made proceeds from his word, and this includes the sun and the moon and the stars. And so what I'm saying is that these things, these calendars, these dates are important. And that's what we're going to see in Ezekiel. And that these dates, and the reason why God is using time prophecies is a witness against the pagan gods. So, and if anybody has thoughts on this, I'm just trying to express myself the best way I can. So in symbolic language was contained in that role the influence of every nation, tongue, and people from the beginning of Earth's history to its close. So we know that we need to eat this book, right? So that's what we've been teaching for a long time. We need to eat the book. And the book is the book of Daniel, right? We know that's it. We know that book is also Millerite history, so it's church history. We know that book is also the book of Revelation. We know it's God's word. But what is it that this book is representing? It's representing a time prophecy or a message based upon time. And so we gave a message based upon time. And we know that it was sweet in our mouth, but it was made in our belly, made bitter. So when we give this message, we have this book and we're going to eat this book. So we're going to eat it. It's going to be sweet. And then we give this message, and then it's going to be bitter. And this bitter is this disappointment. And the question is why? Why do we go through a disappointment? This is the question that I've been asking myself. And probably you have been asking yourselves. So we know that the Millerites went through a disappointment, and we know we're paralleling Millerite history. But the question is, why did the Millerites go through a disappointment? Well, we know that they weren't ready for Christ to return, but couldn't God have done things differently? You know what I'm saying. I mean, you probably thought about this. How come things have to work the way that they do? Why couldn't we have just this clear message that something's going to happen and it just happens? Why do we have to go through this disappointment? Now, we know that part of the answer is that we don't understand everything. So the way that I was showing this is that we have these reform lines, right? We have this period of darkness, and then we're going to have a reform line. We're going to have a period of reform. And this reform is going to give us light, and it's going to be an increase of light. And we're going to have a 3-step testing prophetic message, which is going to develop and demonstrate 2 classes of worshipers. So the messages that are being given are going to change us. Now, Ezekiel is going to have a message as well, but he's also going to have disappointment. He's going to have a lot of discouragement. And we know the prophet Jeremiah also, he's going to be prophesying at this time as well. And he's going to have lots of disappointment, lots of discouragement. I mean, he's going to, write the book of Lamentations, which is, of course, exactly what it is. So in here, this reform line, this is, a period of darkness where there's understanding that's wrong. And in the case of Ezekiel, we know that the understanding that they have has to do with their false gods and their belief that the stars guide them. Because the gods that they make, these idols that they worship, are also in the sky. And they believe that they have to do certain things to get things to be the way they want. They want their gods to be happy with them. And so they offer sacrifices, animal sacrifices to these various gods. But God's the one in control. There's only one God. There isn't all these other gods. And he's in control over all of history. So this book, which is the history of the world, God's in control of that. But we need to give this message about that. And that message means that we have to understand to some degree what God is doing. But we don't understand everything. So we give a message, and that message is going to cause a work to occur of reform, but it's also going to be bitter. Now, when it comes to Ezekiel, we know that we don't think of Ezekiel as a reform line. And we're going to deal with that, though, when we study chapter 4 next week. We're going to deal with the reform line that is in Ezekiel. But we don't normally understand where that reform line is, because Ezekiel is in the 4th generation, but he's going to have a reform line. It's not a major reform line. It's not like the reform line of the Exodus or the reform line of the flood or the reform line in the time of Christ or the reform line of the Millerites. But it still is a reform line. And he has some time prophecies. And those time prophecies are going to mark a point in history, which I guess we could call the time of the end. If we wanted to do it that way, we could look at it different ways. We could actually look at the first time prophecy. So there's kind of 2 times. There's the time of the end earlier, and then there's the end of these 2 prophecies. So we're going to look at that in Ezekiel chapter 4. But in understanding this message that he's going to give, because he's going to be given a message that has to deal with time. And so all of this zodiac stuff, all of this stuff dealing with the stars, dealing with these constellations, dealing with these false gods, we're now going to see that God is in control, and he's going to be able to predict the future. Now, we know that astrologers in the book of Daniel, one of their jobs is predict the future, and they predict things like when there's going to be an eclipse of the moon. So any kind of event that occurs within the sky, these astrologers are working to predict these things, when they're going to occur. They need to know if there's going to be a solar eclipse. They need to know if there's going to be a lunar eclipse. They need to know when the different stars are going to align, or when they're going to be in different places in the constitution. And so this astrology is connected, of course, to astronomy. Initially, they were the same word. There wasn't a word for astronomy. We just used the word astrology because it's just the study of the sky. But when we think of horoscopes, which is sort of not really how Babylonian astrology worked, it's kind of a modern thing just to put into newspapers. But they believed in this idea of that the heavens or the gods were controlling things, but we know God is controlling things. So is that clear to people? Am I making sense? Or is there something that anybody wants to add to this?
You're taking it a good step at a time and making it very clear.
Okay, good. Yeah, because it is, these are these little steps, and if we don't understand, each of these steps and where I'm going, when we get to other chapters in Ezekiel, like Ezekiel chapter 8, we're going to see some things there then that we never saw before because of how we looked at the beginning. And it's going to be quite interesting. But we're going to take our time to get there.
With respect to time,
yeah,
and the war in heaven, Satan was still moving back and forth, talking with Christ at the time of Job. And Christ saying, "What do you think of my man Job?" and so forth. There's another example of this Satan showing his face in time throughout God's plan.
Yes. And I mean, there's a bunch of things about the story of Job where, people kind of question, well, if Satan was cast out of heaven, how did he end up being in this discussion regarding Job? And we know that Satan was also cast out from heaven at the time of Christ. And so there's some symbolic representations of what this cast out from heaven means. Now, we just kind of take it as some kind of literal war, and maybe there was to some degree. But there's definitely a progression in which Satan loses favor with the angels, and his plans become clearly discerned. And when he's there at the crucifixion of Christ, any influence that he might ever have had with any angels is immediately gone, because he reveals his character there at the cross. But the whole time he's trying to hide his character. So we know he's also going to be cast down to the earth during the 1,000 years. He's going to be on this earth. So at the beginning of the 1,000 years, he's cast down. But there he's bound. So right now, Satan has been cast down to the earth, but he's not bound. He's going to be bound. Now, of course, we know that the binding has to do with his lack of ability to deceive anyone anymore, because there's no one to deceive. But still, we believe that Satan did have access to heaven, which we see in the book of Job. Now, so let's go back, and we're going to deal with this eating of the book in Ezekiel. So we're going to have to go to chapter 3. We're going to start on chapter 3. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, eat thou that thou findest, eat this roll, and speak unto the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he caused me to eat that roll. I need to show you the screen. Sorry about that. And he said unto me, Son of man, cause thy belly to eat, and fill thy bowels with this roll that I give thee. Then did I eat it, and it was in my mouth as honey for sweetness. And he said unto me, Son of man, go get thee unto the house of Israel, and speak my words unto them. For thou art not sent to a people of a strange speech, and of a hard language, but to the house of Israel. Not to many people of a strange speech, and of a hard language, whose words thou canst not understand. Surely, had I sent thee to them, they would have hearkened unto thee. So the way that I think about this is in just the context of July 18th. When we made this prediction, I began sharing it with people, guitar students, people I worked with, other music teachers, people on the internet, friends, and I found that there was a reception to those who were not Seventh-day Adventists. Much more easily did they accept the prediction. But for Seventh-day Adventists, they didn't predict it. They didn't accept it, for the most part. So it was a hard sell for Seventh-day Adventists, but it was an easy sell for people of the world, especially as you saw the pandemic unfolding. People just know something's coming. Adventists are saying Jesus is a long way off. He's not going to come. We can't have any time prophecies. We can't have any knowledge of when he's going to come. We just have to wait and see, when he's going to come. We have no work really to do. We got to give the gospel just as we always have been, and just leave all things in God's hands. And on the surface, it sounds good, except that God says we have to give a message. We know that this message is based upon time. But we know we're not predicting the exact time of Christ returning. We're not predicting external events, but we are looking at time. We're measuring the time so that when after things have occurred, we will know that this is the time. We will know that God had been leading. And so it's important for us to understand time prophecies and to understand the time prophecies of the past and how we're moving through time at the present. But obviously it's sweet in our mouth. So when I think about the things that I found in God's word, these are pretty amazing things that we have found. And to tell people about them, you want to tell people about them because they're just so amazing, that this stuff exists. Just like talking about the 25,920 minutes or months or years. That's a really interesting fact. But we know that this is going to be a bitter message. So one is, we know that God's people aren't going to hear us. So whether they hear or whether they forbear, whether they hearken unto us, it doesn't matter. We have to give this message. But he says in verse 7, but the house of Israel will not hearken unto thee, for they will not hearken unto me. For all the house of Israel are impudent and hard-hearted. Behold, I have made thy face strong against their faces, and thy forehead strong against their foreheads. As an adamant harder than flint have I made thy forehead. Fear them not, neither be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, all my words that I shall speak unto thee, receive in thine heart, and hear with thine ears. And go and get thee to them of the captivity, unto the children of thy people, and speak unto them, and tell them, thus saith the Lord God, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear. So that's as far as we're going to get here in this study. Tomorrow we're going to deal with the rest of chapter 3. So we have this message to give. This message is a message based upon time, understanding the history of God's providences. So it's based upon time, especially time in the past. So one of the things that we have done that I would think is a mistake in trying to predict events, God had given us this structure, and most of us don't understand it. And this structure is the prophecies that Seventh-day Adventists already know. The 2,300 days, the 70 weeks, the prophecy of Revelation chapter 9. And then he also gave us other prophecies that we didn't know about. Ezekiel chapter 4. So the 390 years and the 40 years leading up to the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem in 587 BC. So those are things we didn't know. He also gave us an understanding of the 2,300 days in a deeper way than we had ever understood it. That is, we could look at 457 BC and we could have more and more evidences that 457 BC is connected to 1844. So God gave us that information that we never had before. We also came to understand the 70 weeks in a much deeper way, not just the beginning there in 457, but also the end, the 70th week. So God gave us light on the 70th week. And this was connected, of course, to the 2520 and the 2,604 year prophetic mirror. So God gave us further light and expanded our understanding of the prophecies of Millerite history. But as far as his providences and the history of the church and of the world, God had given us an insight into Millerite history. And the way that we got that insight was we went through an experience. That is, we recognized that we were repeating Millerite history as a movement. And also the history of the world. I don't think I ever understood as much about history as I've learned in the last 2 years. The history of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, the history of the papacy, the history of the United States, all these different, the history of Islam, all of these things have been opening up to us. Now, we still have a message to give, and that's why we're doing these studies on Ezekiel, because we realize that we didn't have a good understanding of what we were talking about when we gave this message initially. And God has given us more and more information, more and more light on what this message is and what it is we have to give. And so my appeal to people has been, we need to study these things that were the basis for our prediction. That is, many people believed when we analyzed something. So, for instance, we were in the story of Joseph, and we had these 11 years here to the butler and the baker. And the butler and the baker have 2 dreams. And then there's going to be 2 years. And then you're going to have that 7 years of plenty, because you're going to have the Pharaoh's 2 dreams.
You might want to switch your view.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so you have this 11 years over here. This is from when Joseph is 17. So obviously there's 17 years from when he's born, and 11 years. And then you're going to have these 7 years. And then you're going to have at the end of another period of 11 years. So this is 11 years. This is 11 years, which is 22 years, which is a symbol of restoration. You have Joseph's 2 dreams here, and the Pharaoh's 2 dreams here, and then Joseph's dreams are going to be fulfilled here. And of course, 22 years later, and 22 is the doubling of the number 2. And in this whole story, you have all these doublings. You have Jacob and Esau are twins. They're doubled. We have Abraham and Isaac. They both meet in Abimelech. A very similar story. Obviously, the baker and the butler, their 2 dreams, the Pharaoh's 2 dreams. So you have all these doublings. And of course, a chiasm has these doublings. And somebody asked me a question, what were the 12 years here at the end? So you're going to have 5 years here and 12 years here to when Jacob dies, and that's 17 years. So, we have this chiasm with these 17. And, we would do something like 17 or 11 times 17 equals 187, right? So this is a symbol of July 18th. And we also know that the number 1117 is a prime number, and it's the 187th prime. So, we would see all these structures about these things, and people would think this is how we came up with July 18th. They would look at our analysis of numbers and not realize that this was an analysis way after the fact. It had nothing to do with how we predicted July 18th. So what God had given us is he had given us this history, and he connected it with this symbol of 187. And there's so much about the number 187. It's the number of days from the first day of the first month to the 10th day of the 7th month. It shows up in history in various ways. So there's just so many things that we could mention. And so we expected an event to happen. And we gave a message, and the message was sweet in our mouth, but it was bitter disappointment, right? And we know the Millerites had that same experience. So when we go to Revelation chapter 10, and Revelation chapter 10 is an extremely important chapter when it comes to time and to time setting, because this is Millerite history. And Millerite history is going to be sealed up by 7 thunders. And those 7 thunders are going to be opened up in our history. And those 7 thunders seal up the meaning and the significance of Millerite history. And what Adventists believed is that, the 7 thunders had to do with Millerite history, but they just felt that they were sealed. And after October 22nd, 1844, we then understood the disappointment. And so those 7 thunders had been unsealed. But we can now see that that wasn't the case. That in our history, as we've gone through this repeat of Millerite history in this movement, that we now understand Millerite history. That is, we saw the waymarks that nobody saw. Nobody saw Boston, July 21st, 1844. Samuel Snow declaring that it's midnight and that he's giving the midnight cry. So we didn't see some of these things. And that's the 5th day of the 4th month. So that's Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1. So we can see that all these things are tied together. Ezekiel is tied with Samuel Snow. Ezekiel is tied with Millerite history. And we're tied with Ezekiel, and we're tied with Snow. We're tied with Millerite history. In fact, we're tied with every history. We're tied together with all these events that have happened in the past. So in Revelation chapter 10, you're going to see this, and it says in 10 verse 7, but in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound. So we actually did a whole study of this, dealing with these the 7 trumpets, and dealing with Millerite history. We know in Millerite history, they believed that August 11th, 1840 was going to be the beginning of the 7th trumpet. So they'd give a message based upon time. It was August 11th, 1840, and they believed that probation was going to close on that date because they believed that the 6th trumpet was ending. And if the 6th trumpet ends and the 2nd woe ends, then the 7th trumpet must begin and the 3rd woe must begin. Right? That's what they thought. But of course, that never happened. But they still had to give this message. And we know, so this voice of the 7th angel when he shall begin to sound. And if we look at verse 6, the verse before that, we know that this is a scene that we see in Daniel chapter 12. Very similar scene. It's the same but different. But it says that this angel that stood with one sea upon the earth lifted up his hand, and one on the land, lifted up his hand to heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, who created heaven and the things that are therein, and the earth and the things that are therein, and the sea and the things that are therein, that there should be time no longer. And of course, when we think of time no longer, Seventh-day Adventists, we think, that's the end of time prophecies. We can't set any dates in the future. Now, but in the context here, this is a message that's being given by the Millerites prior to 1844. And what they're saying is time is up, right? That's the message that they were giving. Time is up. That's how they understood it. Now we know that was the end of the prophetic periods, but it wasn't the end of time. Christ began his work on the Day of Atonement. And so we're in the Day of Judgment, which is a day, right? It's a very long day, but it's a day. And then the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again and said, go and take the little book, which is open in the hand of the angel, which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. So here we have a little book. Now we know that this is the book of Daniel. So this is not just... this isn't the same book that you see in Revelation chapter 5. This is a different book. And And then when the angel said unto him, give me the little book, and he said unto me, take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. So again, we have the sweet as honey, honey for sweetness, sweet as honey, but we're going to have this bitter experience. We're going to have this disappointment. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey, and as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. And he said unto me, thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. Now, we know then, if this book, the book of Daniel deals with time prophecies. And if we look at Millerite history, we know that Millerite history, that they gave this message and they were disappointed. But now we know that we have to take up that same message and we have to eat that little book. We have to understand prophecy. And but when we do that, we're going to have this message that's sweet, but we're also going to experience a disappointment. But we still have to prophesy again. But we have this message of prophecy. And we have to be faithful to that message. And we have to understand it. There was this discussion on Sabbath regarding, well, we don't really understand these things. We just accepted these things that were basically, I was teaching Adilio and Stephen and Jeff. People were just accepting it, and they said, well, we're trusting in the arm of flesh, which I don't quite agree with. I don't think that that's what was happening. I don't think it was trusting in the arm of flesh. It's just that many of us were just trusting, we're just accepting something without understanding it. But we have to go through that experience. But now our responsibility is to understand it. So God has given us this time to understand this message. And it's going to take a bit of work. But we will find that it's sweet in our mouth. But it still has a bitter experience attached to it. I'm not saying that we're going to set time again, because we're not. But it's part of our experience that we have to give a message. And that message may not be received. So any thoughts on this?
Am I unmuted now?
What's that?
Hello.
Yeah, Patrick.
Yes, I just unmuted my screen. I'm thinking in reference to Seventh-day Adventism, the Levites that we want to call to prepare to warn the world in the case of the Sunday law.
Mm-hmm.
Our message to them was, of course, reform messages, the daily in Daniel.
Yeah.
Islam wasn't really on our map until 9/11. And then that pointed us back to the Millerite sequence of events and process of repeating. And we would say, well, the Millerites had time, but we now have the events, but not time. But now, just before July 18th, God has given us a series of data points leading, that are really time, that lead us up to a time. And we know for sure by Ellen White that Nashville is going to get hit with a fireball sooner or later. And we connected the event with the data points of time.
Right.
And I still believe that is going to be relevant whenever Nashville gets hit. It's going to be Islam that does it. And that connects us back to 9/11 and the Millerite history and process of repetition. As you said, we're still repeating that process, but we're getting more data points in the middle.
Right. Yeah.
When Islam hits, then we need to be able to explain that to the satisfaction of other Adventists. So the first thing we'll have to do is take them back to 9/11, and that's our switch, like our train track switch. If we can get them to thinking about the repetition of Millerite events, then we can steer them on the right track. Otherwise, they're still just slowly sinking. What's going on in the Adventist churches now is abominable. Who's going to have open minds and hearts at the time Islam actually does hit Nashville. But we have to be ready with our message at that time to explain it.
Right, and I don't think that we were ready on July 18th.
No, we weren't, and we're not yet.
No. And so, and that's my goal, I guess, from a personal point of view, is not to be teaching everybody everything I know. My goal is to have you guys teach everything that God has shown us, based on how you understand it on your personal study. And that's going to be different for each individual as far as to what things or what areas we understand, and also what those people that we're going to speak to, what it is they're going to receive. And so what I've been trying to do is add a broad basis. To me, this is a very broad teaching that we have. It goes beyond any one person's ability to understand it all. There's no way that I could understand it all. And I've spent most of my life trying to understand everything. And I've never been able to do it. And the more I learn, the less I know of what I know there is to know. That is, what there is to know keeps expanding. There's so much information. But God can guide us for each of our particular minds. And one of the ways that I look at this is I look at my wife, who is definitely different than me. She has trouble with math, but she understands this message and she knows how to present it to people so that people receive it. And people always tell her, you explain things so simply. Of course, that's never been said about me in my entire life. So obviously there are different people with different abilities and different gifts. And we also have different people to minister to. So we all have our own field of labor. And right now it appears that my field of labor is just to present that there is this field of labor that we need to go out into and that we have to be prepared for it. And so, I'm thankful that I can do something. But we know that the July 18th prediction, it was too easy. That God doesn't work that way. We have work to do. And some people don't like that. Some people didn't like being embarrassed, but also they don't like the fact that we actually have all this work to do. And it's work. It's not something that just takes a few thoughts throughout the day. For me, it's personally 6 hours a day, right? So I have 6 hours a day because I work full time to dedicate to studying and to presenting. And I know that, we often think, well, we're all busy. But God gives each of us the time that we need. And we just have to take advantage of that. So that's why, a lot of things that people waste their time on, we try not to. So anyway, thanks for that comment there, Pat. And
through no planning of my own, I find myself arriving in Knoxville and Sevierville. Knoxville has a numbers attached to it, so do Sevierville. I have no clue what the Lord has got me to, what work He's got for me to do there. But this is over from September 25 to October 5.
Yeah. Well, all I know is that whatever work God has for us to do, it's the little things that He gives us that we have to do faithfully if we're ever going to do anything big. And so many people want to do some big work. They want to somehow be part of this big picture in some way that they're noticed. But the reality is, it's those little things that we do each day that make up the big things. And so we have to be faithful in the little things, which is, a theme that I've had in teaching this, that often we, and that was the problem with the July 18th, is we were looking for some big thing, and yet we hadn't really done the little things yet. So let's close with prayer. And the dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the words of Scripture. We know that There's things that we've seen over the last few days that we never understood before. And all these things humble us, Lord, to recognize that there's so much that we don't understand. But we know, Lord, that you've formed us and you've guided us. You made us the way we are, and you've also changed our heart, given us a willing heart to follow and serve you. And we know that you've given us each a portion of the wall to work upon. And we just ask that we can be faithful in that portion. We know that we have to work with one hand with a tool and the other hand with a weapon. We know that there's the attacks of the enemy. And sometimes those attacks even come from within. And Lord, we just ask that we can be faithful. I thank you again for each person who's participated, who's watching these videos. May your Holy Spirit continue to work in their lives on a personal level while you work in this world in controlling, setting up kings and tearing down kings. Lord, I know we're also frightened about the things coming upon this earth. It's a terrible time to be living in on that level, but I know, Lord, that we need to warn others and give them a message of hope and comfort so that they can endure the things that are coming. Thank you for hearing our prayer. Be with us again tomorrow morning, that we ask that you can bring us together to study and that we can understand and see wonderful things out of thy law. And we thank you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.